Picture two guys. The first one's alive about 12,000 years ago before anybody's planted a single seed on purpose. He wakes up whenever he feels like it. Getting food takes him maybe 15 hours a week. He heads out, tracks an animal, digs up some roots, grabs a few handfuls of berries on the walk home, and the rest of the time he's basically just hanging around, napping, talking, fixing his tools. Over a year, he eats something like 100 different wild foods. So if the berries don't show up, whatever, he eats something else. He's tall, his teeth are fine, he's in good shape. Now jump to his great great grandkids a few thousand years later after somebody's figured out how to grow wheat. One of them is out in a field bent over from sunup to sundown. He eats pretty much one thing now, so when that one thing has a bad year, he's in real trouble. He's shorter than his ancestor was. His teeth are rotting. His back is wrecked from doing the same motion about 10,000 times a day. And he's catching diseases his great great grandpa had never even heard of, mostly off the animals he now lives right next to. And this is the part they kind of skip over in school. Farming didn't make people healthier. As far as we can tell from what's left of them, the first farmers had it worse than the hunters they replaced. Worse health, less reliable food, way less free time. So that's the question. If the old way was actually better, steadier food, more time off, healthier bodies, why did anybody ever switch? Let's start with how we even know this, because honestly, it sounds made up. When you dig up skeletons from right around the time a group flipped over to farming, the bones basically rat the whole thing out. In places like ancient Greece and Turkey, your average hunter gatherer stood around 5'9". After farming shows up, that drops to about 5'3". And it doesn't climb back to the old numbers until something like the 20th century. The teeth go the same direction, cavities go through the roof because living off grain is kind of like soaking your mouth in sugar all day long. You also start seeing these faint lines in the tooth enamel, which is what shows up when a kid is starving or sick while they're still growing. And it keeps going. More anemia, more busted spines, more arthritis from kneeling on the ground grinding grain for hours at a time. Then there's the disease, which might be the worst part. A little band of 30 people that's always on the move leaves its mess behind and walks away from it. A farming village just sits there. Hundreds of people parked in one spot, living right on top of their own garbage, sharing space with pigs and cows and chickens. Just about every big scary plague you can name, measles, smallpox, the flu, tuberculosis, came over to us from the animals we suddenly lived shoulder to shoulder with. There's a guy named Jared Diamond who looked at all of this and flat out called farming the worst mistake in the history of the human race. And he's not just saying it to be edgy. That's honestly where you end up once you've looked at the bones. So now it's even stranger. People walk straight into a life that made them smaller, sicker, and more miserable, and then they stuck with it. Before we get to why, though, we've got to kill the cartoon in your head. You know the one, cavemen as these starving, miserable creatures gnawing on bark who'd obviously leap at literally any other option the second it showed up. Turns out that's not really how it was. People who actually went and lived with modern hunter-gatherers came back with something kind of awkward. Take the Jew/Hwansi out in the Kalahari. They're living in one of the harshest deserts on the planet, and they were still only spending something like 2 or 3 hours a day getting food. One of the older guys got asked why his people never bothered taking up farming like the groups nearby, and he basically said, "Why would we plant anything when there are so many mungongo nuts out there?" There's an anthropologist who called hunter gatherers the original affluent society, not because they had a pile of stuff, because they didn't want much, and the stuff they did want was easy to get. They had downtime. They had a varied diet that didn't all fail at the same time. No boss, no landlord, nobody showing up to collect taxes because there was nothing worth hoarding and nowhere to put it anyway. What they had instead was knowledge in their heads and people they could count on. So, no, farming wasn't some obvious upgrade. From inside a perfectly good hunter gatherer life, it looks like signing up for a worse job. Longer hours, worse pay, more pain. Nobody stood at the edge of an empty field and thought, "Ah, yes, I would love to trade my freedom for back problems and a bowl of mush." Which actually tells you something important. Nobody chose this. Not on purpose. It had to be something that crept up on people slowly. without anybody really noticing it was happening. So, how does a whole species sleepwalk into its own worst idea? The trick is that there was never a single moment where somebody became a farmer. No big meeting, no vote, no lone genius inventing agriculture in an afternoon. It was just a long string of tiny, reasonable little steps, each one totally fine on its own, that quietly added up to a trap. It probably started by accident. Hunter gatherers already grabbed wild grain when they came across it, partly because grain is one of the few foods you can actually store for later. So a group harvests some, drops a few seeds near camp without thinking twice, and the next year goes, more of it grew right where we spilled it. Handy. So they start scattering a few extra seeds on purpose. Still not farming, just a little hack to get more food closer to home. But that extra food does this quiet thing in the background. It lets the group stay put a little longer, and it lets them keep more babies alive. When you're moving around all the time, you can't really have kids close together because somebody's got to carry the small ones and you've only got so many arms. Settle down, and that break comes off. More kids make it. The group slowly gets bigger. And that's the jaws of the thing closing. More people means you need more food, so you plant more, which lets you feed even more people, who then need even more food. Every generation leans on the crops a little harder than the last. Give it a few hundred years, and the village has so many mouths to feed that going back to hunting and gathering just isn't an option anymore. There's no way the wild land around them could feed that many people. They're stuck, totally dependent on the exact crop that's grinding them down. There's a line I really like from Yuval Noah Harari about this. He says, "We didn't domesticate wheat. Wheat domesticated us." And it's worth sitting with that for a second because it flips the whole story around. Think about what wheat actually pulled off here. 12,000 years ago, it's just one random wild grass out of thousands growing in a little patch of the Middle East. Nobody's paying attention to it. Today, it covers a giant chunk of the entire planet, more ground than just about any other plant alive. If you measure success the way evolution does, which is really just how much of you is there, wheat is one of the biggest winners in the whole history of life on Earth. And how'd it manage that? By getting a clever ape to spend its entire life taking care of it. To grow the stuff, people had to clear out forests, haul water all over the place, pull weeds, scare off birds, fight bugs, all of it for the plant's benefit. And our bodies just aren't built for that. We're not made to spend all day folded in half, planting and weeding and grinding. The backs, the knees, the joints, they all give out eventually. So the early farmer pays for wheat taking over the world with his health, his time, and his freedom. And what does he get back? A diet so narrow that one bad harvest can wipe out his whole village. From the wheat side, incredible deal. From the farmer's side, he signed a contract he couldn't read and couldn't get out of. He didn't beat the plant. The plant got him, and got him to feel good about it, building storehouses and temples and entire religions basically in its honor, which leaves one last piece, and it's kind of the answer to the whole mystery. If farming made everybody's life worse, how on earth did it end up taking over the entire planet? Here's the grim little secret. Farming didn't win because it was better for people. It won because it was better at making more people. An acre of land you're farming feeds way more humans than an acre you're hunting across. The individual farmers are shorter, sicker, more worn down, but there are a whole lot more of them. And when one group has 10 times the people, it doesn't really matter that each person is worse off. They've got the bigger crowd. They've got the spare hands. So when farmers and hunter-gatherers run into each other, the farmers just take the land. Slowly, over thousands of years, generation after generation, they spread out, and the hunter-gatherers get pushed into the corners nobody else wanted. The deserts, the deep forests, the far north. The handful of groups still living the old way today are basically the places farming never got around to reaching, so nobody really chose farming. It just outbred everything else. The healthier, freer way of living lost. Not because it was worse, but because it made fewer kids. And the kicker is, we never actually climbed out of the trap. We just kept going deeper. More people, more food needed, more work. Do it again. You right now, with your job and your rent and your one specific grocery store you go to, you're sitting at the far end of a deal some hungry little village made 12,000 years ago without even realizing they were making it. The weird part isn't that they messed up, it's that when you look at where it all led, cities, writing, medicine, every person you've ever known, it's genuinely not clear it was a mistake at all. It was just a trade. They handed over their health and their free time, and a few hundred generations later, here we are. Worst mistake we ever made, or the whole reason any of us are here? Honestly, probably both.